She's not with us. She handles the coats. My sister didn't move. She stood 2 steps behind my brother-in-law at the entrance of the Hargrove Hotel ballroom, holding his blazer over both arms like an offering, wearing a plain gray dress while every other woman in the room sparkled. Derek laughed at something his colleague said and turned back into the crowd without looking at her once. I had been standing 20 feet away when it happened. My invitation was last minute. Derek had forgotten to mention the company anniversary gala to my sister, so she'd called me 3 days before, voice too bright, words too fast, asking if I could come. Just to have someone I know there, she'd said. I almost didn't go. I wish I had gone sooner. I watched my sister, the woman who graduated summa cum laude, who used to make me study flashcards at midnight before my SATs, who taught herself Spanish in 4 months just because she wanted to stand perfectly still while a stranger handed her his coat and walked away. And she took it. She hung it without a word. Her face was somewhere else entirely. Something cold moved through my chest. I had not seen my sister in 7 months. She'd stopped returning calls around Christmas. My mother wrote it off as the newlywed adjustment phase. Derek was busy building his consulting firm. Lauren was probably just tired. That's what we told ourselves. That's how we made it comfortable to stop asking. I crossed the room toward her. When she saw me, something flickered behind her eyes, not happiness, not relief. More like fear of what my being there might cost her. Hey, I said. You came? She smiled, but it didn't reach anything. You asked me to. She nodded, glancing over her shoulder toward where Derek stood holding court near the bar, already on his second drink. Already performing. Just don't make a scene, okay? He doesn't like when things get complicated. I almost asked what that meant. Instead, I said, have you eaten? She looked at me like the question was in a foreign language. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a rough patch. This wasn't adjustment. My sister had been disappearing piece by piece, and we had been too polite to notice the shape she was leaving behind. I stayed close to her the rest of the evening, watching. Derek introduced every colleague, every client, every server by name. He introduced my sister once when his regional director asked directly and said, "That's Lauren, she helps keep things running," while gesturing vaguely in her direction the way you'd point out a piece of furniture. The director smiled politely and moved on. My sister refilled Derek's water glass. At dinner, she didn't sit at his table. She sat at the edge of the room near the kitchen exit, alone, eating quickly with the posture of someone who expected to be called away at any moment. When I sat down across from her, she looked startled. "You don't have to sit here," she said. "I want to." She looked down at her plate. Her wrist, where it rested against the white tablecloth, had a faint yellow-green shadow beneath the skin. Old bruise. Fading. But there. I didn't say anything. Not yet. But I filed it away in a part of myself that had gone very, very quiet. On the drive home that night, I called my mother. She was asleep. I called my college roommate instead, a guy named Marcus who'd spent 6 years doing private investigations before moving into corporate security. He picked up on the second ring. "I need a favor," I said. "Quiet one." "How quiet?" "Run everything you can on a Derek Calloway. Married my sister 14 months ago. Runs a consulting shop called Calloway Advisory Group." There was a pause. "What are you looking for?" "Whatever he doesn't want found." I didn't sleep that night. I went back through every interaction I could remember from the past year and a half, every time my sister had canceled plans, every voice message that sounded rehearsed, every photo she'd posted that looked perfect and made me feel, somehow, like I was being managed. I opened her Instagram and scrolled back 14 months. There was a version of her from before the wedding laughing too wide, holding a coffee cup, standing on a fire escape in the rain, and then a slow, gradual erasure. The captions got shorter. The photos got fewer. The last post was 11 weeks ago, a picture of Derek's firm's anniversary logo with the caption, "So proud of everything he's built." 400 likes. She hadn't responded to a single comment. Marcus called me 2 days later. "You want the short version or the long one?" "Both." Derek Calloway had incorporated his consulting firm 18 months ago, 3 months before the wedding. The registered agent was his mother, Sandra Calloway. The business address was a mail forwarding service. He had outstanding civil judgments in 2 states from a previous venture. He had been named in a harassment complaint filed by a former employee, settled quietly, non-disclosure in place. His personal credit was a disaster, but his firm's accounts were flush because of one major client, a real estate developer in Charlotte who apparently didn't ask many questions. And 6 weeks ago, Derek had filed a joint tax amendment reclassifying my sister's freelance income she'd been earning from her graphic design clients for 4 years before they met under his firm as a contracted service. He was using her work to reduce his tax exposure. She probably didn't know. There's one more thing, Marcus said. Tell me. His mother Sandra, she's a co-signatory on the mortgage. The house they live in? Your sister's name isn't on the deed. I sat with that for a long moment. My sister had given up her apartment, her clients, and 14 months of her life to live in a house she didn't legally own, working for a man who had reclassified her past 4 years of income as his own. I drove to her house the next morning without calling ahead. Derek's car wasn't in the driveway. I knocked. It took a long time for her to answer, and when she did, she was wearing a long-sleeved shirt in 70-degree weather, and her eyes were doing that thing again, the thing where they went somewhere far away and checked the perimeter before settling on you. He's not here, she said. I'm not here for him. She let me in. The house was spotless. Not lived in clean. Staged clean. Like a showroom nobody was supposed to actually touch. There were no books on the shelves. Her sketchbooks she'd filled at least 3 a year since she was 15 were nowhere. I looked at the walls. Framed prints, all Derek's taste. Not a single thing that looked like her. I sat down at the kitchen table and asked her to sit across from me. Lauren, I said. I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. She didn't speak for a long time. She looked at her hands, then out the window, then at nothing. And then something broke open and she started talking and couldn't stop. It had started small, the way these things always do. He'd joke that her design work wasn't real income. Then he'd start answering for her in conversations. Then he'd ask her not to make plans without running them by him first, because his schedule was unpredictable and he needed her available. Then her friends fell away one by one, not from any dramatic confrontation, but because she kept canceling and eventually they stopped asking. By month 6, she was managing his calendar, handling his client communications, coordinating his firm's events, and keeping his house, all while being told how lucky she was to have a man who let her stay home and focus on herself. The first time he grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave a mark, he cried afterward and brought her flowers. She'd believed it was a one-time thing for 4 months. By month 8, she tried to leave. She packed a bag while he was at a client dinner. His mother Sandra showed up at the door 40 minutes later. She'd called her before calling the police and spent 2 hours sitting at this same kitchen table explaining to my sister that Derek was under stress, that marriage required sacrifice, that a woman who couldn't support her husband during a difficult season wasn't ready for commitment. Then Sandra took the bag and put it back in the closet. My sister had not packed another bag since. When she finished talking, the kitchen was very quiet. I reached across the table and held both her hands. They were cold. I'm getting you out, I said. Today, right now if you want. She shook her head. He'll come back. He's not going to do anything, I said. Because I'm not going to come at him the way he's expecting. I'm going to take everything he's built, and I'm going to hand it back to him in pieces. But I need you to trust me. She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded. We spent 2 hours at my apartment with a family law attorney. I'd contacted the night before a woman named Claire who specialized in coercive control cases. My sister talked. Claire took notes. Claire explained, in calm and precise language, that the income reclassification alone was potentially fraudulent, that a protective order was well within reach, that the deed situation could be challenged given the marital contributions my sister had made, and that Derek's pattern of behavior had a name and a legal framework and consequences. My sister kept saying, I didn't know that was abuse. I thought I was just bad at being married. Claire said, that's what coercive control does. It makes you responsible for someone else's cruelty. I drove my sister to my mother's house that afternoon. My mother opened the door, took one look at Lauren's face, and didn't ask a single question. She just put her arms around her and walked her inside. That night, I heard my mother crying softly in the hallway after she thought everyone was asleep. I sat at my kitchen table with Marcus's file, Lauren's statement, and a yellow legal pad, and I started building. Derek came to my mother's house 2 days later. Pressed shirt, calm voice, the particular brand of reasonable that men like him wear like a costume. He said he was worried about his wife. He said she was struggling emotionally, and he was concerned about the people she was listening to. He said he hoped we could have a productive conversation as a family. My mother didn't open the screen door. I stepped out onto the porch. She's safe, I said. She's going to stay that way. He smiled, patient and condescending. Look, I get that you're protective. That's a brother thing. But you don't understand what goes on in a marriage. I understand enough, I said. I understand that Callaway Advisory Group has a registered agent problem. I understand the Charlotte account has a few compliance gaps you probably don't want your client looking into. I understand Sandra's name on that deed creates some interesting questions about marital asset classification. I paused. And I've got a lawyer who's very interested in explaining all of it to a judge. His smile didn't disappear. It just stopped working. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. You already made yours, I told him. The night of the gala. When you handed her a stranger's coat and called her the help, he left. He sent 2 texts to my sister's phone, we'd already documented them, and then went silent. But Sandra didn't. My sister had warned me about Sandra. She had described her as the architect, the woman who had modeled every behavior Derek replicated, who had taught him that a wife's purpose was to serve a husband's image, who had shown up the night Lauren tried to leave and put the bag back in the closet. Sandra hosted a monthly dinner for Derek's clients and business contacts, a thing she called a community gathering but was essentially a networking event in expensive tablecloths. She maintained the family's social reputation the way other people maintained their lawns obsessively, and with a careful eye for anything out of place. The next dinner was scheduled for a Saturday, 3 weeks out. I asked Marcus to get me on the guest list. He knew someone who knew someone. I was introduced, via a forwarded email, as a potential investor contact of a Charlotte associate. Sandra's assistant confirmed my seat without a second look. I spent those 3 weeks preparing. Claire filed for a protective order granted. Lauren filed a police report documenting the physical incidents documented. The fraudulent income reclassification was referred to a CPA with forensic experience reviewed and flagged. And my sister, quietly, without telling me until afterward, had been doing something of her own. She gave me a USB drive 2 days before the dinner. What's this? I asked. The last 8 months, she said. I started keeping my phone in my pocket, recording when things got bad. I didn't know why exactly. I think part of me knew I'd need it eventually. I looked at her. There's enough on there, she said. Claire said, it's admissible. I thought about what it must have taken living inside that house, inside that marriage, knowing she might need evidence and having the presence of mind to collect it anyway while someone was systematically dismantling her sense of self. I had no words for what that kind of strength looks like from the inside. Okay, I said. Then we use it. The Saturday dinner was held in Sandra's house, a large colonial in a well-kept neighborhood where all the hedges were trimmed to the same height. The guests were exactly what I'd expected: business contacts, minor local influencers, a city council member, 2 commercial real estate brokers. People who cared about their reputations. People for whom public embarrassment was a form of injury. I arrived on time. I accepted a glass of water. I made small talk with a man in a blazer about the commercial development on 5th. I waited. Sandra gave a welcome speech at dinner, the kind that sounded warm but was really a performance: gratitude, community. The Calloway family's commitment to partnership and integrity. Derek sat at her right, smiling his managed smile, scanning the room for anyone worth impressing. He didn't see me until the end of her speech. When Sandra gestured to her guests and his eyes traveled the table, when he found my face, the color left his. I didn't move. I just looked at him. Sandra was wrapping up. She invited everyone to share a little about themselves. A realtor went first. Then a woman from a local nonprofit. Then the city council member. I let 3 more people speak. I let Derek's shoulders unknot slightly. Then I stood up. I appreciate the invitation, I said, and the table oriented toward me. My name's Owen. Lauren Calloway is my sister. I let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. I wanted to make sure the people who matter most to this family have some context before they read about it elsewhere. Sandra's fork went down. Derek said, "This isn't the time. I have 7 minutes of audio," I said, and I put my phone on the table, face up. I have a forensic accountant's report. I have a police report and a protective order filed 6 days ago. I have a statement from my sister's attorney. I looked around the table, not at Derek, not at Sandra, at the guests. I don't want to play anything here. I'm just asking you to ask yourselves why you haven't heard from Lauren in 8 months. Why she wasn't at this dinner. Why she was standing alone in a hotel ballroom holding her husband's blazer while he told a colleague she was the coat check. The city council member put his napkin down. Sandra stood. "You need to leave this house right now." "I'll leave," I said. "I just wanted you to know what I know. Because the story is going to come out. The only question is whether the people in this room find out from me, tonight, or from a journalist next week who's already been given the same file." There was no journalist. There would be. I had a contact at a local news outlet who'd expressed interest, but I hadn't sent anything yet. It didn't matter. The room believed me because it was true enough. Derek pushed back his chair. "You think you can come into my mother's house?" "I think I already did," I said. "Sit down, Derek." He didn't sit. But he didn't move either. I picked up my phone. I looked at Sandra, who had gone very still in the particular way of someone calculating. "Your son used her work to file a fraudulent tax amendment. Her name isn't on the deed of their marital home. You were the person who showed up the night she tried to leave and convinced her to stay." I kept my voice level. "Those aren't opinions. They're documented. 3 guests excused themselves before dessert. The city council members shook hands with no one and left without a word. One of the real estate brokers paused by my chair on his way out and quietly asked for Claire's contact information. Sandra did not say goodbye to anyone. She stood in her foyer after the last guest left and looked at her son and said nothing at all. I think that silence, from her, was the thing that actually reached him. She had spent years engineering his image. Watching it collapse in her own dining room, she had no script. I drove home and called Lauren. "It's done," I said. "How did it go?" "His investors know. His mother knows, the people in her circle know. Claire's going to file the amended asset claim Monday morning. The rest is up to the courts." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did he yell?" "He tried." "Did you?" "No." Another pause. "Good," she said softly. "He always said no one would believe me because I was emotional. I wanted this to be the opposite of emotional." "It was," I said. "It was just the truth." He didn't have an answer for it. The legal process took 4 months. Derek's attorney was competent but working with weak material. The recordings, the forensic accounting, the documented pattern of coercive control, the protective order all told a story that was difficult to reframe. The marital asset case resulted in a settlement that included Lauren's name being bought off the equity she'd contributed and a structured payment plan that Claire described as reasonable given the circumstances and that I, privately, thought was inadequate but that Lauren said felt like oxygen. Derek's Charlotte client, after a quiet conversation with their own attorneys about the compliance gaps in the Callaway accounts, parted ways with the firm. Sandra's community dinners stopped appearing on the neighborhood calendar. The fraudulent income reclassification was referred to the IRS. That process is still ongoing. Last I heard, Derek did not go to prison. I'd like to tell a story where that part is different, where the criminal justice piece moves as fast as the civil one and lands with the weight it deserves. It didn't. It rarely does. The DA reviewed the physical evidence and the recordings and said there was a case but that it would take time and asked for Lauren's patience. And Lauren said yes, and we are still waiting. What I can tell you is what happened to my sister. She moved into a small apartment 6 weeks after leaving. She painted the walls herself a deep, dusty blue that she said reminded her of the sky just before it goes completely dark, when there's still some light in it. She dug her sketchbooks out of the box she'd carried from the house. She sat at her kitchen table for 2 hours, not opening them, and then she opened the first one and started drawing. She got a client 2 months later, a small restaurant that wanted a rebrand. Then another. Then a referral from the second. She's slow about it, deliberate. She works at her own pace now. She says the hardest part of recovery isn't the fear of the past. It's unlearning the need to make herself small enough not to be noticed. I visit on Sundays. We cook something new every week. She's got this system where we find a recipe we've never attempted and see what happens. Last month we made gumbo. It was terrible. We ate all of it. One Sunday, she told me she'd been contacted by a women's advocacy organization that had seen coverage of her case. They wanted to know if she'd be willing to speak at an event, not a big platform, just a panel for advocates and social workers about recognizing coercive control. She'd said yes. She asked me if I thought she was ready. I said, "You've been ready. You just had to get somewhere safe enough to show it." She got quiet for a minute. Then she said, "I used to think I was bad at being a person. He made me feel like every mistake I made was evidence of something fundamentally wrong with me. And I believed him for so long." She looked out the window. "I think the hardest part is that I still hear it sometimes. That voice. I'll do something small, burn dinner, misread an email, show up 5 minutes late, and there it is. See, you can't do anything right," I said. "What do you do when that happens?" She thought about it. "I try to find one true thing," she said. "Something I can actually verify. Like the gumbo tasted bad, but I made it, and I sat down and ate it with someone who stayed. That's true. That's mine. He doesn't get to have that." She has a print above her desk now. She made it herself, a simple design, clean lines, dark blue background. It says "Still Here." 2 words. She said it started as something angry and turned into something else by the time she finished making it. I'm still angry. I want to be clear about that. I sat in a hotel ballroom and watched a man I had welcomed into my family hand my sister a stranger's coat in front of his colleagues and call her the help, and I am not the kind of person who gets over that quickly or easily. I don't think I'm supposed to. I think some things are supposed to stay sharp enough to keep you honest about what you're willing to accept in the people around you and what you're willing to say something about. What I didn't do was yell. I didn't throw a punch. I didn't make it about my anger instead of her truth. I almost did. There were moments, particularly the evening in Sandra's dining room, where the version of me that wanted to overturn the table was very present and very loud. I let it be loud and I didn't listen to it. Because my sister had asked me to let the truth be louder. She knew what she needed better than I did. I just had to show up and trust her. That's the thing nobody tells you about protecting someone you love. It's not about what you're willing to do to the person who hurt them. It's about what you're willing to be for the person who's trying to heal. Patient, consistent, present on a Sunday with a bad recipe and nowhere else to be. My sister is still healing. It is not a straight line. There are weeks she calls me, sounding like herself, and weeks she goes quiet and I send a text and wait. There are days she says she's fine and days she says she doesn't know yet. Both are true. Both are allowed. Last week, she sent me a photo of the balcony of her apartment. She'd put plants out there, 5 of them, different kinds, crammed together in a row of mismatched pots. Below the photo she'd written, "They're all alive." Week 3. I'm counting. I wrote back. That's 5 more than I've ever managed. She sent back a laughing emoji and then nothing for the rest of the night, which meant she was working, which meant she was okay. That's enough. For today, for this week, that's everything. I didn't set out to be the person who walks into a dinner party and dismantles someone's reputation. I set out to find my sister. What I found was what was left of her after 14 months inside a machine designed to make her doubt her own name. I found her quiet and frightened and carrying evidence on a USB drive she'd made herself because some part of her had never stopped fighting. I followed her lead. I showed up. I stayed. The rest was just the truth, finally given enough room to move.